Chapter 11. Our Apostolic Mandate, Letter of Pope Saint Pius X to the French Bishops on the Sillon, August 25, 1910. In a letter addressed to the Bishops of France, the 25th of August, 1910, Pope Saint Pius X condemned the Sillon. This association was born on French soil, and consequently, it is to the archbishops and bishops of France that the Pope addresses himself. The Sillon, i.e. the furrow, was founded by Marc Sangnier, who was somewhat the forerunner of what later became Catholic action. A good Catholic in private, he entertained certain notions which more and more identified themselves with liberal and Masonic ideas. Moreover, the Pope himself alludes to this. At its beginning, the Sillon was a sentimental student movement. Marc Sangnier visited the high schools and colleges, where he would make impassioned speeches. A brilliant orator, very sentimental, he could awaken an extraordinary enthusiasm in his audience. But he proved himself to be dangerous because he preached a false notion of charity, as the Pope explains very well. At the beginning, the bishops themselves were quite favorable to the movement, because its members were Catholics who manifested a desire to extend the reign of our Lord, to develop the Church, and to renew Christianity. But slowly Sangnier strayed completely, and the Pope had to intervene severely, and quite simply, he condemned the Sillon. Marc Sangnier submitted, but the ideas of the Sillon tenaciously remained, and it can be said that a good number of the French archbishops and bishops, and even cardinals like Cardinal Gerlier, Cardinal Liénard, and others who still lived not long ago, were profoundly marked by the ideas propagated by the movement, and which influenced them when they were young men, still in school. Cardinal Gerlier, for example, was one of those who lent much support to the concepts of the Sillon in the Diocese of Lyon, where he was named archbishop in 1937. Finally, this movement caused considerable ravages, which were to ultimately manifest themselves in our own day. The letter of Pope Saint Pius X is all the more interesting in that, in the description of the movement that he paints, one finds extraordinarily depicted the very ideas that are currently being propagated. The Pope targets the people who call themselves Catholic, but who have completely deviated. Quote, "Our apostolic mandate requires from us that we watch over the purity of the faith and the integrity of Catholic discipline. It requires from us that we protect the faithful from evil and error, especially so when evil and error are presented in dynamic language, which, concealing vague notions and ambiguous expressions with emotional and high-sounding words, is likely to set ablaze the hearts of men in the pursuit of ideas which, whilst attractive, are none the less nefarious. Such were not so long ago the doctrines of the so-called philosophers of the 18th century, the doctrines of the Revolution and Liberalism, which have been so often condemned. Such are even today the theories of the Sillon, which, under the glowing appearance of generosity, are all too often wanting in clarity, logic, and truth. These theories do not belong to the Catholic, or, for that matter, to the French spirit." End quote. This last comment is a little incense wafted to the French, so that he can pound a little harder on the theories of the Sillon. The heyday of the Sillon. Quote, "We have long debated, venerable brethren, before we decided to solemnly and publicly speak our mind on the Sillon. Only when your concern augmented our own did we decide to do so. For we love indeed the valiant young people who fight under the Sillon's banner, and we deem them worthy of praise and admiration in many respects. We love their leaders, whom we are pleased to acknowledge as noble souls on a level above vulgar passions, and inspired with the noblest form of enthusiasm in their quest for goodness. You have seen, venerable brethren, how, imbued with a living realization of the brotherhood of men, and supported in their selfless efforts by their love of Jesus Christ and the strict observance of their religious duties, they sought out those who labor and suffer in order to set them on their feet again. This was shortly after our predecessor, Leo XIII of happy memory, had issued his remarkable encyclical on the condition of the working class. Speaking through her supreme leader, the Church had just poured out the tenderness of her motherly love over the humble and the lowly, and it looked as though she was calling out for an ever-growing number of people to labor for the restoration of order and justice in our uneasy society. Was it not opportune, then, for the leaders of the Sillon to come forward and place at the service of the Church their troops of young believers who could fulfill her wisdom and her hopes? And, in fact, the Sillon did raise among the workers the standard of Jesus Christ. This was the heyday of the Sillon. Its brighter side accounts for the encouragement and tokens of approval which the bishops and the Holy See gave liberally when this religious fervor was still obscuring the true nature of the Sillonist movement." End quote. Appearance of disturbing tendencies. Quote, "For it must be said, venerable brethren, that our expectations have been frustrated in large measure. The day came when perceptive observers could discern alarming trends within the Sillon. The Sillon was losing its way. Could it have been otherwise? Its leaders were young, full of enthusiasm and self-confidence, but they were not adequately equipped with historical knowledge, sound philosophy, and sound theology to tackle without danger the difficult social problems in which their work and their inclinations were involving them. They were not sufficiently equipped to be on their guard against the penetration of liberal and Protestant concepts on doctrine and obedience." End quote. One could say that something similar happened during and even before the council. The liberals are Catholics, of course, and one sees priests, bishops, and even cardinals who are full of good intentions recommend union with all the religions and all the ideologues in order to end disputes and discord and do away with fights. Such language may seem noble, but it is vain. All the ideologues lack what Saint Pius X identified as the knowledge of history, sound philosophy, and firm theology. They let themselves be taken in by idealists who led them outside the Church. They did not know how to resist liberal and Protestant errors. Quote, "They were given no small measure of advice. Admonition came after the advice, but to our sorrow, both advice and reproaches ran off the sheath of their elusive souls, and were of no avail." End quote. This description of their souls, their elusive souls, is curious. It is still true of liberal Catholics today. It is futile to place them before the truth and make them notice the reality. No, nothing can be done. For 5 years we have been discussing with the liberals at Rome and trying to make them face the truth. They will not answer our questions. They do not reply to the problems that we bring to their attention. They flee. Whatever we say flows like water off a duck's back. It flows, but it does not penetrate, and they repeat the same thing over and over. You must submit. Submission. But submission to what? The situation is the reverse of what Saint Pius X knew, because now it is the liberals who occupy Rome. It is they who want to impose their ideas, and it is the traditionalists who appear disobedient to the Church. You might say that those people are Sionists. Everything that Pope Pius X was so clear-sighted as to denounce concerning the Sillon is exactly what they think, believe, say, and do. Quote, "We owe the truth to our dear sons of the Sillon, who are carried away by their generous ardor along a path strewn with errors and dangers. We owe the truth to a large number of seminarians and priests." End quote. Those who became bishops, cardinals, and who influenced the council were precisely seminarians at that moment. Cardinal Gerlier, Cardinal Liénard, to speak only of the French. Quote, "Who have been drawn away by the Sillon, if not from the authority, at least from the guidance and influence of the bishops. We owe it also to the Church in which the Sillon is sowing discord and whose interests it endangers." End quote. The Pope then defines certain points of the Sillonist doctrine that he condemns. In the first place, it is the pretension of the Sillon to escape the jurisdiction of ecclesiastical authority. That is the first point. The second is that the Sillon is carried away by a misguided love of the weak. And thirdly, that the Sillon has a way of understanding human dignity that does not conform to the way the Church understands it. It has the noble concern for human dignity, but misunderstood.